Welcome to the Selling Show, where we unpack, repack, and break down exactly how top experts sell their ideas, their value, and their services. This is your host, David Newman, and you are in the right place if you want better clients, bigger deals, and higher fees. She's here. Jess Pettitt, good enough now, the legend. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Oh, thank you so much, David. It's so great to see you and be on your show.
So I'm going to ask you the question that I have always wanted to be asked, and no one has ever asked me yet. The question I want to be asked is, so how did David Newman become David Newman? So the question for you, my friend, is how did Jess Pettitt become Jess Pettitt? What was your professional journey that brought you to the work that you're doing today? And then give us a couple of interesting pit stops along the way.
Sure. Well, how I became a speaker consultant person is I kept getting fired. I feel like there is a consistent pattern in how I describe myself, which is normalizing things people don't talk about. So I've been fired a whole bunch. I got sober 16 years. Last week, actually, was my 16th.
Woohoo!
Woo! And I have a therapist. I don't know why these things are not weird or why they are so strange to people. That doesn't make any sense to me because they're not weird. But I think how Jess Pettitt became Jess Pettitt is constantly screwing up, feeling obligated to be perfect and never really attaining some kind of perfection, and being deeply connected to whether we call it diversity, equity work, rooting for the underdog. That's kind of a Venn diagram of making a lot of mistakes, not being perfect, and always shooting for the underdog, allowed me to kind of listen to my own audience members that came up with, they told me that their big takeaway was being good enough now. And that's kind of that Venn diagram smushed together, one day at a time, doing the best you can with what you got some of the time. So here I am.
Excellent. And then tell us a little bit about the book. I mentioned Good Enough Now. The title of the book, my friends, is Good Enough Now. And we'll talk more about that. And there's some cool resources and tools and assessments that you can take and all of that good stuff. But tell us about the adventure of putting the material together for the book and then how the book has sort of taken on a life of its own.
Well, first I have to plug your book program actually was incredibly helpful in my creation of a book. So there's me giving, cite your sources, Jess.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It was wonderful. And so is your marketing book, which here I am. I'm a fan. I think writing the book, the coolest, quickest thing to say is that doing diversity work the way I used to do it was that it was external to me. So it was about experiences or exposure or kind of like Tennessee Williams glass menagerie collecting things. And I didn't see anything changing. And so I either could quit or do something different. And I realized I have no other monetizable skills. So I had to like flip it inside out. And the joke there is that the only other skill I have is folding a fitted sheet, and flipping it inside out is actually part of that process. When you flip out the work, instead of it being external, it's all internal. So then I'm not a woo-woo mindfulness coach or something, but like I am responsible for who and how I am. And if more people could be responsible for who and how they are, then we might actually get somewhere. So that was kind of the creation of it. So what is this process? What's the process of discovering what it is that you do that's annoying or frustrating to other people? So that sent me down this dark archival research of my social justice heroes to read their letters and their journals to determine what was frustrating about working with them, even though they did good work, what was frustrating about them. And then I pulled that all out into doing the best you can with what you've got some of the time. Is your own work, your own responsibility. A lot of times people will be challenged and they don't know how to do it perfectly, so they just don't do it. But not doing it is also a response. So how do you try? How do you try to try when you're exhausted or trying is trying, right? So how do you try to try when trying is trying?
Yes, trying can be trying. By the way, I have to give you an award right here, spontaneous award, ding, ding, ding. Get out the trumpets, get out the band. 300 plus episodes, you have given us the very first Tennessee Williams reference.
Oh, I thought I was going to be shout out to two of your books. Okay.
So that's pretty awesome. I want to dig into this demystifying diversity, as it says big and bold on the homepage of your website. Did a little bit of stalking in preparation for our chat here. So I think as far as a speaker demo video, another first, the first use of the word tushy at the end, at the outtakes, right? The cute little dog with the cute little tushy.
As a little Easter egg.
I'm going to ask you like just a global macro question. Why is diversity so hard in the current climate that we're living and working in?
Well, I would say the Cliff Note answer is that we will not meet people where they are at. If we would just do that, I would have to go get a real job. But we don't. So what we do is we lead with where we are at, and we expect everyone to meet us where we're at, except we don't actually even really know where we're at. But from this unknown location where we currently are, so it's not even like we don't have a GPS, right? It's like it's looking for signal of our exact GPS location. We expect everyone else to come to us, but we don't even know where we are. And diversity slogans are meet people are where they are at. Well, how am I supposed to do that if I don't even know where I'm launching from? And the target also does not know where they are at, right? So I know we're going to have to like diagram the sentence soon, but that's why it's hard, is that we refuse to meet people where they're at. And so I was talking to you earlier, I just got certified into this new assessment tool. And one of the things I love about it is that it measures the gap between who and how you think you are and how other people actually experience you. And so there's a gap of consciousness there that can now be quantified. And so if someone is in utter denial that difference exists, if you are very aware and you can like deal with difference without it actually impinging on your own identity, it can get really frustrating dealing with someone who can't do that. But you have the skills, you're just not applying them to people that you're frustrated by. If you are an us-them kind of person, congratulations, you now at least are aware there's a them. That's improvement. That's amazing, right? But if you are aware there's a them, but you don't know what to do about it, or the them is a little threatening still, then that's not any different than like a polarized conversation or polarized community dynamics that we're seeing now. Then, you know, the kind of happy middle is minimizing all differences. We all bleed red, right? All lives matter. Those are true statements, but those differences are also true. So how do you hold the differences while also recognizing there's commonalities? It's more complicated than a t-shirt or a slogan. You actually have to know where you are at and how you are being where you are at each time you intersect with another person. It's exhausting. I would rather just watch Netflix.
We interrupt this interview with an important announcement. If you're committed to better clients, bigger deals, and higher fees, get over to doitselling.com right now and grab a copy of my new book. That's the deal, kids. Grab a copy of the new book and then get all the bonuses, companion tools, trainings, and downloads at doitselling.com. Buy the book, get the bonuses. Buy the book, get the bonuses. Buy the book, get the bonuses. That's how it works. I'll see you over there.
Well, you also mention that most of these traditional diversity initiatives fail. And it's a very interesting reason that you cite. It's because people feel excluded from the process. Isn't that ironic, right? So it's like, well, yeah, they're doing this to us. They're doing this. This is some, like you said, externally forced upon, and there's all kinds of labels for it and all kinds of names for it. Cancel culture, politically correct, snowflake, whatever. Right. And people feel it's my way or the highway. Now, when the shoe's on the other foot, my way or the highway, well, of course, we don't want to do that to people. But so many of these traditional diversity initiatives they make people feel like, well, I don't believe that, but they're making me say this. So here we are. Talk about that. How do we get people at least on the same side of the table to even have these initial conversations without causing this inflamed response? Is there an entry point that you found with most of your clients, most of your audiences, that is a good, and there's no perfect place to start, and someone's going to hate you no matter what, but is there a common ground that we can start as an entry point?
I believe yes. And it's not going to make me a lot of friends because it's a really hard question. But we talk a lot about conscious and unconscious bias. And we talk a lot about inclusion and exclusion. I'm making a matrix with my hands, right?
Yes.
So in order to really do something, what you're really trying to do is to make your unconscious actions, behaviors, thoughts more conscious, right? Like we can agree on that. Okay, great. So then why don't you have a conscious conversation about who you are intentionally excluding? That should be the easiest conversation to have. But we are trained, I'm not excluding anyone. There are not enough chairs in the world for every human being. You're evidently only targeting humans, so you're excluding plants and animals, right? So there are not enough chairs for every human being to be sitting at that table. So you have to be excluding people. You have to be able to discern paid members, people who live in this state, people who are in this industry, people who qualify in this particular way. If they don't, they are excluded. When you're doing a job search, you don't just, anybody want a job? You have to find out somebody who has the right skills at the right pay. They like the job. You like them. It's a dance. But if we can't have a conscious conversation about who we are consciously excluding, we cannot have a conscious conversation about who we think we are including. But more importantly, we cannot have a conversation about who we are unconsciously excluding, which are people, or who we are unconsciously including, which are the people the easiest to separate their money from. So like from a marketing place, your unconscious inclusion person, that's kind of like the avatar. You know, these people are going to do it. Okay, great. But now you're trying to grow your business. Well, you're going to grow your business from somebody else. You have to move from unconscious to conscious. And I suggest starting with who's not welcome here. And that is a conversation most people don't want to have. That's first step.
You know, I want to go back to, this must have been, 8-10 years ago. Perhaps you remember, there was an NPR commentator, Juan Williams. And Juan Williams gets on his show one day and he openly admits, he says, listen, I'm just going to tell you what makes me uncomfortable. When I'm on an airplane and someone gets on the airplane in Muslim garb, usually a woman, of course, I just sort of get nervous. I have a very nervous reaction to that. I think, as a non-expert in this field, that would have been an incredibly rich opening to a conversation about, I'm curious, and the reason I think he said that to open a conversation. What subsequently happened is within 24 hours, he's immediately fired. He's immediately blacklisted. And then within 2 weeks, he gets a nice cushy job at CNN that pays 5 times what he was getting at NPR. So that'll show you, Juan Williams. Why is this conversation about X makes me uncomfortable? Why do you think so many people see that as the end of the conversation instead of what I thought he was trying to do is to begin a conversation and to unpack that and to get to the root cause of it and to have an intelligent conversation about, well, what would make you feel differently? Or where do you think that feeling comes from? Or where else in your life are these snap judgments based on differences causing you discomfort that's strictly triggering some conscious or unconscious response? That wouldn't it be nice if we were in control of that instead of being victimized by it or being pushed one way or the other? Anyway, that's a whole big Juan Williams thing. Please respond to that. Does that make any sense at all?
It does make sense. And I think what you're trying to ask about is, why didn't we meet Juan where he was at? Right? Like, that's a conversation beginner. So now we very quickly, because I'm trying to monitor the time, we have to have the conversation that what's legal is not moral and what's moral is not legal. And so religious discrimination is illegal. Recognizing and understanding that you have conscious or unconscious bias around religion is a moral conversation you need to have. For corporate America, you're going to go, I've snapped my fingers, you're going to go to what's legal. Well, that looks like a litigious problem. We're out of here, right? You're out. But you can still have the moral conversation, right? So is it a person who appears brown? Like, are there different kinds of brown people that you are comfortable or not comfortable with, right? Is it religious expression? Are there some religious expressions you are more comfortable with or less comfortable with? If you saw a nun who is wearing a headdress, or you saw a Muslim woman wearing a hijab, do you have a different response? What if the nun is also brown? Does that help? Or is there a religion that you're more familiar with? The fact that you're on an airplane, is this linked to terrorism? Because we linked racism and terrorism specifically after 9/11. That is an intellectual conversation to have. And I can have that potential conversation with you on your podcast. But when a corporation is so large and so dependent on consumer money for marketing dollars, the risk is too high to have a moral conversation because of the litigious manner that is directly connected to capitalism. Buy one, and then one went and found another job that paid more, right? But that's exactly what we have to be able to do. Now, what is hard is that the moral piece behind the legal conversation is that sexism, racism, xenophobia, and Islamophobia are real, and they are real painful. But that's probably not actually what motivated NPR's decision to remove the commentator, because we're standing up for Islamophobia, because that would be what is seen as a political stance. It doesn't have to be a political stance. It could be a moral stance of that particular company. The next time is, well, companies don't necessarily have morals. They have values and mission statements and more human rights based on tax law than some humans even have. But this is an exquisitely designed system. One of my favorite social justice quotes is, an exquisitely designed system produces the results it gets. One is expendable because we can't have this conversation. If we could have this conversation, no one would be expendable. What that would mean that everyone would start to have this conversation, which technically women wearing hijabs in the Muslim community would love people to have. Why is this so threatening to you? Because that's how you would address Islamophobia, terrorism, racism, and just general hypocrisy of what people are comfortable with or not comfortable with.
Yeah, for sure. Now, tell me a little bit, because I know you and I before...
This is the best response ever. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Yeah, for sure.
So let's see if we can tie this with a little thread to cancel culture. And right before we turn on the microphones, we talked about this amazing presentation that you gave about how to make yourself uncancelable. What are some nuggets from that really anyone who is doing business and the business of expertise that most of our listeners are in, how do we avoid, or not even avoid's a terrible word. How do we avoid getting in trouble with this? But how do we, not even that, how do we get ahead of this? How do we raise our consciousness to our higher selves and our better selves so that we can meet ourselves where we are and that stupid stuff doesn't leave our mouth?
Well, you had me until the very last bit.
Okay.
So similar to, how do I just not offend anybody? Well, if you were to isolate yourself in a cave, you're going to offend Aunt Mildred for not going to her birthday party.
True.
So what you need to do is to recognize you are offensive.
Always.
Sometimes, well, specifically, company included. But if you can understand that you are offensive, then you can actually work on being responsible for what you're trying to say and how you're trying to say what you're trying to say. So then the language I use is that, imagine how communication would be different if you were 100% responsible for what leaves your face, your thumbs, your fingers, right? 100%, not 50%. That's how therapists have job security, but 100% responsible, clarity, formed message, clear, 100%. And it goes, you release the Kraken. Then the impact may or may not align or be congruent with what your intention was, but you're going to be far less defensive about it because you were 100% clear to begin with. What ends up happening is that we offend people all the time, and most of the time we don't even know about it. Sometimes we learn about it, but because we weren't really clear on our intention, we get defensive. I'm like, I did not mean that. I don't know what I meant, but it wasn't that. But that's a level of defensiveness, but it's our responsibility to control that defensiveness. And you can do that by being responsible for what you tried to say in the first place. What did you try to say? How did you try to communicate what you tried to say? That's your work. So then when we start thinking about when the language you used was getting ahead of cancel culture, if you, instead of trying to avoid being canceled, just recognized it's possible, then you're ahead of it because it's no longer upsetting, right? Like there is definitely examples of doxing where people like cancel you online. Cancel culture has really created shameful experiences that have had negative consequences across people's lives. That is real. And that's not every case. And what I find is that we are so defensive that the only place of reaction from defensiveness is canceling somebody else first. Well, if we diffuse defensiveness, then we don't need to cancel other people for everything, for not putting their grocery cart away. I don't mean like a really horrible thing. I mean something minor. And somebody's been killed by a grocery cart, so they're going to be mad at me because I used that as an example of a minor thing. Yes, yeah. I did. And I'm responsible for it. And I recognize that could have been upsetting for someone. Come for me, right? The way to do that, and this is what I talked about in that speech that you're referencing, is the idea of sitting in curiosity. Like the one homework assignment that I leave people with is, can you ask a question today of another human being that you legitimately do not know the answer to? Can you ask with such a degree of curiosity that you have to listen for an answer you don't know about? When even like interviewing this, like we know each other, you've done your homework, you kind of know where I'm going, maybe Tennessee Williams, that threw you for a loop, but like pretty much you knew where I was going and you know I'm a nerd, so who's surprised I made a literary reference, right? But can you ask a question you legitimately do not know the answer to at all? And let's pretend you're good at that. Okay, so then the next homework assignment is, can you listen to someone as if you are currently wrong?
Wow.
Can you listen to them as if they are going to impart information to you that is going to make your stance change? If you can do that, you are rooted in curiosity. It is very hard. It's not impossible, but it's hard to be defensive when you're curious. And it's hard to cancel people when you're curious. And that combination is the closest you're going to get to actually meeting people where they're at.
So,
Red.
Yes, no, but I'm picking up that this is work. And I think a lot of people want to make this easy. It's like, Jess, can you just come talk to our team? And we just want the easy button for diversity. We want the easy button for inclusion. We want the easy button so that we communicate without these biases.
Wait. We're not just going to listen to this episode. There are downloads, there are resources, there are links, there are bonuses waiting for you on this episode's page when you go over to doitmarketing.com/podcast. That's right, doitmarketing.com/podcast. Grab the notes right under this episode. See you over there.
Talk about, because I think your work is harder than it looks, but it's easier than most clients have been making it. Most clients, most audiences, they have this enormously complex drama around, oh, this is unsolvable. This goes back to, the Greeks and the Romans and the Arabs and the Israelis and, the Northern Irish and the English. And no, It does not have to be like creating world peace. And I love the responsibility is 100% on us. And I also love can you listen to someone with the assumption that you are wrong right now and you are open to learning? Talk about with your favorite clients and your favorite audiences, the ones that have good intentions and that really want to make this shift in their organization. How have they been over complexifying this for themselves? And then how do you cut through some of that noise?
Great example. So a global tech company that I will not name because one, I signed an NDA, but a global tech company had a homophobic comment posted to an internal Slack channel during Pride Month. They're in 11 different countries. And that individual comment on Slack that came out of England, derailed productivity for the company quicker, faster, and more directly tied to money than COVID did because they had no idea what to do. They didn't know how to respond. Because the world is round, that might be the most controversial thing I've said on this podcast, but because it's a round planet, it was 8 or 9 time zones later that leadership even found out about it. So the homophobic post had been up for 8 or 9 hours with no response from anybody. Also, coincidentally, happened to be when leadership was off the grid at a leadership retreat. So they found out about it through a phone call because they didn't have internet access. But it turns out none of the leadership team are even on Slack because they have people to do that. So they hired me to help with the response to the response, which eventually came 7-8 days later, and it did not go over well. So then they hired me 2 months later, right? They wanted policies, protocols, what to do so that this never happens again. Well, first off, it 100% is going to happen again. It's happened 3 more times in the time between that incident and you hiring me. I interviewed 150 employees from around the world and listened to the number of people whose religion, the amount that they drink or don't drink, whether they're conservative or liberal, their stance on guns, abortions, these kind of politicized items. They're not allowed to talk about those things at work unless they fit this liberal, inclusive, secular kind of situation, right? So there's hypocrisy all over the place. So what it turned out was really the problem was the leadership team were part of the original 20 employees for the most part. There's a couple of outsiders. And they thought it was still a small, scrappy business. So 100% of the employees have access to an all-access Slack channel that would work if all 20 employees could sit at a table. But you now have 30,000 employees across 11 different countries, but your internal policies and protocols didn't grow with the business because your mindset is that it is still a small, scrappy garage band because those are the only people you play with, right? So I really appreciate you saying it's harder than it looks, but it's easier to do. The way of preventing it is recognizing that your mindset is actually limiting the growth of your own company because you're running it like a garage band. And when I started pulling all that out, they didn't know 1 to 2 layers below them. They had no clue what was happening in any country. There would be a staff member in charge of a continent. That makes sense on paper when your mindset is garage band. So how do you do this to respond to this little thing? You have to recognize that you are the problem. And how are you bringing that problem all the way down the ranks to the point that that company lost multiple millions of dollars in those 7 days because the employees were not working, because they were so up in arms about what to do or what not to do. And they didn't have the skills or the tools of how to do it. It wasn't a statement. It's not a policy or a protocol. It's recognizing this is going to happen. It is absolutely going to happen again, especially when your mindset doesn't match the reality of I wouldn't say that it was a monster, but I would say that it was 11 archipelagos of little disparate islands floating about with a garage band based in the Southern Hemisphere, thinking that they knew everything that was going on.
Crazy stuff. Unbelievable.
Simple solution.
So if we were to take one central idea from the themes that we've talked about today and all the brilliance that you have in the Good Enough Now book and this new assessment tool that you're using with your clients, what's the one overarching takeaway or concept that you want to really leave people with so they can start to think differently about this?
I'm going to give one sentence and one question because I think that it really will fit with every listener. They're either going to like the sentence or they're going to like the question. And that is, it is. That is the sentence. Or what if it is? So why I say those two sentences is there is something going on in every listener, you and my life as well, with our friends, our family, people on social media, strangers in the grocery stores, people walking in on airplanes, whatever, that there is something that you notice and you are making meaning about the thing that you notice. And it just is. So remove some of the judgment and the meaning. It just is. And if you're like, what does that mean? What if it is? What if it is something different? How do you feel about that? Right? So you're either going to have like a lot of thoughts about what if there is meaning here, or take the meaning away and just it is and get value neutral around it. If we can do that, you use the language of kind of like recognizing quicker what we're doing. That's how to diffuse that. Joe Gerstand uses a great phrase that is kind of wedging in between your first thought and your second thought. That pause allows for your second thought to actually, what am I doing here? And then that's the difference between responding or reacting, is to be able to wedge in that pause place. So it is, or what if it is the way to do that pause.
And to me, it sounds like both of those are just increasing our level of self-awareness in the moment.
What?
I know.
For who and how we are in the gap in between.
Do you think that would be helpful if we all raised our self-awareness just 1 or 2 notches?
It'd be good enough now, for sure.
It would be good enough now. Well, Jess Pettitt, tell us, how can people get connected and stay connected to more Jess Pettitt brilliance? What resources can we share? What links should be in the show notes? What can we gift people if they would like to go further here?
Well, first, go to goodenoughnow.com. That's the easiest way to get me because no one can spell my last name. So goodenoughnow.com. If you want some free stuff, go to /freebies. You can download all the activities in the book. You can download some interviews. You can download a bunch of resources. But I'm guessing you want a little more. So if you go to /survey, goodenoughnow.com/survey, there is a 13-question survey that involves food trucks, Dolly Parton, and puppies. But it will diagnose you and how you are currently showing up, whether it is very detail-oriented, idea-oriented, or action/inaction oriented. Because if you can know how you are currently showing up, spoiler alert, it's annoying somebody else. But if you can know how you're showing up, then you can at least be conscious of how you're showing up to other people. So goodenoughnow.com/survey, take the survey. You'll get signed up for other stuff. goodenoughnow.com/freebies. Freebies is self-explanatory. I look forward to seeing you there.
And of course, the book is available wherever fine books are sold.
Audio, ebook, paperback.
The whole enchilada. Totally awesome. Well, all of those links, by the way, are going to be in the show notes, one click away directly under this episode when you go to thesellingshow.com. Jess Pettitt, you are awesome. You are amazing. Thank you so much for sharing these value bombs and these resources with us. You're the best. I appreciate you.
Takes one to know one, friend.
And that wraps up another episode of The Selling Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, tell a friend, go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thesellingshow.com. See you next time.